That sound tearing through your speakers right now, that raw, unfiltered scream is real. This is the exact moment Kellyanne Conway, a veteran political operative who built her career on controlling the narrative, completely lost control on live national television. Look at her. Frozen on that split screen, her face is a twisted mask of crimson fury, her voice distorting the microphone as she lunges toward the camera. The host is completely paralyzed, his mouth agape, utterly powerless to stop the train wreck unfolding on his own show. The chyron flashes chaotically, unable to keep up with the pure unscripted rage. This is cable news chaos at its most visceral, and then the camera cuts. It cuts to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and the contrast is absolutely breathtaking. Where Conway is a hurricane of unrestrained emotion, Crockett is the absolute eye of the storm, perfectly still. Her hands are folded calmly on the desk. Her expression isn't one of anger or shock, but of profound, almost pitying resolve. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't interrupt. She simply lets the tantrum crash against her unshakable calm. She was a statue of dignity in the face of pure chaos, and in mere seconds she would speak. Her reply would become a rallying cry, a moment of vindication that would stun millions and set the digital world ablaze. But to truly understand the power of that calm, you have to understand what fueled such a spectacular public meltdown. The powder keg that ignited that explosive moment wasn't just personal, it was profoundly political. The topic that night was voting rights, the most fundamental pillar of American democracy itself, and the conversation had turned to a specific Supreme Court decision that had systematically gutted protections for minority voters. This wasn't some abstract policy debate. This was about the sacred, hard-fought right to have a voice, a right that generations of Americans have marched, bled, and died to secure. For communities of color, for immigrant families watching, this was a third rail, a line in the sand. It was about their very place in this country. And into this emotional arena walked Kellyanne Conway, a veteran spin master whose entire career has been a masterclass in a single dark art, controlling the narrative. Her strategy was a proven formula: deflect, distort, and drown out the truth with a torrent of alternative facts and performative outrage. She wasn't there to discuss. She was there to dominate, to muddy the waters until the truth was unrecognizable. For her, this was just another Tuesday, another debate to be won with loud deflection. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly see coming, was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to play the game. The freshman congresswoman, a former civil rights attorney with a razor-sharp legal mind, had spent her entire career fighting for these very principles in actual courtrooms where facts and truth actually matter. She wasn't there for the spectacle, she was there to bear witness to the truth. She carried the weight of history on her shoulders, the quiet determination of those who had been silenced for far too long. Conway saw just another opponent. She never saw the reckoning coming. And that miscalculation would be her greatest and most public downfall. To understand the sheer spectacle of that scream, you have to understand it wasn't an isolated incident. It was the climax of a career built on a foundation of calculated aggression. This was her signature move. Rewind the tapes, and you'll see the pattern etched across a decade of cable news appearances. There was the infamous alternative facts moment, a brazen attempt to redefine reality itself on national television. There were the countless interviews where she simply talked over hosts, her voice rising in a relentless wave meant to drown out any inconvenient truth. Watch them back to back and you see the same playbook every single time. Never answer the question, always attack the premise, and above all, never, ever cede the emotional battlefield. She wielded volume like a weapon, operating on the cynical belief that the loudest voice in the room wins the argument by default. It was a corrosive strategy that turned debates into shouting matches and discourse into rubble. And for years, against opponents who still believed in playing by the old rules of civility, it worked. She built an entire career on it, rewarded with power and influence for her willingness to bully, obfuscate, and overwhelm. The arrogance became ingrained, a fundamental belief that no truth could survive a sufficiently loud and confident lie. But in storytelling, as in life, every villain who relies on the same trick eventually meets a hero who rewrites the rules. A hero who cannot be shouted down, because their power doesn't come from their volume, but from their unwavering foundation. And on this day, the hero was a woman who had been preparing for this moment her entire life, not in the spin rooms of Washington, but in the courtrooms of Texas. If Kellyanne Conway's power was forged in the dark arts of political spin, then Jasmine Crockett's was honed in the stark light of a courtroom. Her story isn't one of calculated ambition, but of profound purpose. Long before she ever set foot in the halls of Congress, she was a tenacious civil rights attorney on the front lines in Texas, a state where the battle for justice is never easy. She wasn't fighting for airtime, she was fighting for people. Her clients weren't donors or special interests. They were the marginalized, the voiceless, those who had been steamrolled by powerful systems designed to keep them down. She stood before judges and juries, armed not with talking points but with the unassailable weight of the law and a mountain of evidence. Every case was a lesson in composure under fire, in how to dismantle a flawed argument with surgical precision, not theatrical rage. Her journey to Congress was itself an act of perseverance, a decision to take the fight from the courtroom to the national stage because the injustices she saw demanded a bigger platform. This wasn't a politician. This was a public servant in the truest sense. The values she fights for, dignity, equality, raw justice, weren't poll-tested. They were etched into her character through years of seeing up close what happens when those values are absent. So when she walked onto that cable news set, she wasn't entering an alien arena. She was stepping onto a different kind of battlefield. But the mission was the same. Her weapon wasn't volume. It was a deep, unshakable calm forged under pressure. Her ammunition wasn't deflection. It was fact, truth, and the moral clarity of someone who has always fought for something bigger than herself. Arguing with a seasoned spinner on cable news? For a woman who had stared down powerful opponents in high-stakes legal battles, this wasn't a threat. It was just another Tuesday. And as the cameras rolled that night, the unstoppable force of Conway's aggression was about to meet the immovable object of Crockett's principle. The flashpoint was a simple, verifiable fact. A date, a statistic, a direct quote. Something that couldn't be spun. And in that moment, Kellyanne Conway found herself cornered. The facts were a cage and she rattled the bars. You could see the pivot in her eyes, the instant calculation to abandon the argument and attack the arguer. Her voice, already sharp, escalated into a shrill crescendo of personal accusation and whataboutism, classic tools from her well-worn deflection playbook. She tried to bury the truth under a landslide of irrelevant attacks and manufactured outrage, each word louder and more personal than the last. The host, trying desperately to regain control, became a mere spectator, his interjections drowned out by the torrent of noise. It was the same old play, the same strategy that had worked so many times before. And in living rooms across America, that familiar sinking feeling set in, the feeling that noise was once again about to overwhelm reason, that shouting would triumph over substance. But then, something shifted. As Conway's voice reached its fever pitch, the camera found Congresswoman Crockett. There was no anger on her face, no frustration, just a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of her head, a calm blink, as if she were a scientist observing a volatile experiment. She didn't lean in, she didn't lean back. She simply absorbed it. And in the space between Conway's ragged breaths, Jasmine Crockett took a slow, quiet, deliberate breath of her own. The room, for the first time, fell silent. The storm had momentarily exhausted itself, and in that sudden electric quiet, everyone leaned in. What came out of her mouth next wasn't a scream. It wasn't an insult. It was a surgical strike. A mere 17 words that would echo far beyond that studio. In that profound silence, she spoke. Her voice was not a weapon, it was a scalpel. The facts are not concerned with your feelings, ma'am. They exist without your permission. 17 words, delivered not with a shout but with a devastating, unwavering calm that cut through the residual noise like a laser. Let's break down the anatomy of this perfect counterstroke. The facts. She began not with an attack but with an unassailable foundation. Facts. The very thing Conway had spent a career avoiding. Are not concerned with your feelings. This was the masterstroke. In 4 words, she reframed the entire confrontation. It was no longer a political debate. It was a clash between objective reality and subjective, performative emotion. She exposed the tantrum for what it was, a feeling, an outburst, something transient and ultimately insignificant. Ma'am, the final polite dagger. In the face of sheer incivility, she responded with a term of respect, highlighting the staggering disparity in their composure and grounding her retort in an unimpeachable dignity that made Conway's fury look small and childish. The legal precision was breathtaking. This was a closing argument, not a cable news soundbite. It carried the moral clarity of someone who knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that she is standing on the side of truth. The visual contrast was jarring. Conway was frozen, her mouth slightly agape, all the color drained from her face. The fight had simply vanished from her eyes, replaced by a dawning, horrifying realization that her entire arsenal was useless here. The host's eyes were wide, his pen hovering forgotten above his notes. You could hear a pin drop in the studio. For 3 full seconds of dead air, the only sound was the quiet hum of electronics and the echo of those 17 words hanging in the air. Then, the control room erupted. Producers scrambled, voices whispering frantically into headsets, hands pointing at monitors where the live chat was moving at an incomprehensible speed. A waterfall of caps lock and exclamation points. The silent studio and the exploding digital reaction were 2 sides of the same coin, a moment of such pure, undeniable impact that it fractured the broadcast itself. She didn't raise her voice, she lowered it, forcing the entire nation to lean in. And in that hushed tone, she dismantled years of manufactured chaos in a single, flawless moment. The segment ended. The screens went to commercial. But in the digital world, a shockwave was just beginning to form. The clip didn't just go viral, it detonated. Before the segment had even finished airing on the East Coast, it was already taking on a life of its own in the digital ecosystem. It was raw, it was real, and it was relentlessly shareable. View counts exploded into the millions within hours, a number that felt less like a metric and more like a collective exhale. The hashtags told the whole story. Crockett calm began trending, a perfect encapsulation of her powerful stillness, while the Conway meltdown served as the digital epitaph for a strategy that had finally met its match. This wasn't confined to political corners, it became a cultural moment. A-list celebrities shared the clip with captions like "Mood" and "This is how it's done." Late-night hosts the next evening built their entire monologues around it, playing the clip on a loop to roaring applause and gleeful commentary. The following morning, even mainstream news anchors, often wary of such raw moments, played it with a sense of awe, analyzing it not as a political gaffe, but as a masterclass in rhetorical composure. The memes were instant and brilliant, juxtaposing Crockett's serene face with images of a calm ocean next to Conway's screaming head, photoshopped onto an erupting volcano. But scrolling through the thousands of quotes and replies revealed something deeper, something more powerful than schadenfreude. Teachers posted it, writing, "Showing this to my students tomorrow on how to handle a bully." Office workers shared it with the caption, "Me in the next meeting when someone tries to interrupt." This wasn't just a win for Jasmine Crockett. It was a win for everyone who was ever talked over, dismissed, or bullied. It was validation for anyone who ever held their tongue knowing they were right, and a blueprint for what to do next time. The internet made that crystal clear, transforming a 30-second clip into a universal symbol of dignified resistance. But beyond the memes and the retweets, this moment left a lasting mark, teaching a lesson far bigger than any single news cycle. What we witnessed in that exchange was more than just a political takedown. It was a cultural correction. For years we've been told that to win you must be the loudest, the angriest, the most outrageous. That decency is weakness and volume is strength. This moment shattered that corrosive myth. It revealed a profound national fatigue with hysterical aggression and a deep, yearning hunger for a different kind of leadership, one rooted in composure, truth, and unshakable principle. Jasmine Crockett's calm was never passivity. It was immense strength under control. It was the strength of a deep-rooted tree in a hurricane, bending not to break but to prove its resilience. This was a masterclass in how to fight, not by descending into the mud but by forcing your opponent to see their own reflection in the clear, still water of your dignity. Her power came from a place they couldn't touch, a place beyond insults and theatrics. It came from truth. And in that studio, truth didn't just win an argument, it reclaimed its authority. It reminded us that we don't have to scream to be heard, that we don't have to become the monster to slay it. In the end, the scream was forgotten, but the calm reply was remembered. It was quoted, printed, and immortalized. Because dignity is always louder than noise, truth is always more powerful than spin. It was a reminder of what we can be when we lead with our principles, not our prejudices. So the next time someone tries to shout you down, to bury the truth under a wave of noise and anger, remember this moment. Remember that the most powerful response isn't to scream back. It's to speak the truth with a calm that cannot be shaken. This story proves that principle will always outlast prejudice. If you believe in rewarding dignity over desperation, if you want to see more moments where integrity triumphs over insanity, then share this video with someone who needs this lesson today. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that prove our politics can still be about principle, not just power. Be part of the shift toward a more respectful world. I'll see you in the next video.